Through these sessions, we hope to build an understanding of arts research that is dynamic, empathetic, and generates new ways of thinking about arts research in the country. This deep dive session is part of a project by Shilpi Goswami and her collaborator Surya Nandini Naren. Their project received support to organize a conference focused on family photographs from across India, contributing to the micro-histories of individuals and their communities. This conference examined how family photos offer counter-narratives to prevailing discourses and memory-making practices. It aimed to elevate this often neglected area to a significant system for participants of the conference, enabling a common discursive space for idea exchange. This led to a three-part masterclass series with writer and publisher Urvashi Butalia, academic Surajit Sarkar, and graphic novelist Sarnath Banerjee. In today's session, as you can see, today's session is titled Relooking at Archives, Arts and Archival Practices with Surajit Sarkar. Surajit Sarkar works with community and academic archives, pop-up community and permanent museum. Prior to his academic career, he worked as a photocopier salesman, a bank officer, a primary school teacher, video artist, and documentary film and television director. We welcome you to the festival, sir. I would also like to introduce the project coordinators. Shilpi Goswami is an independent researcher, editor, and curator. She has previously worked for the Al-Qazi Foundation for the Arts, Kiran Nadar Museum of Art. She has been a consultant for Qatar Museums and What About Art, Gallery Nature Mode, and the Gujral Foundation in various capacities. Surya Nandini Naren is an assistant professor of visual studies at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I welcome all of you to the first session of Deep Dive, and I now pass the mic to Surajit Sarkar.
Thank you. And thanks to IFA for making this possible. Yeah. So as you can see, I've already made a slight edit change in the title. The subtitle is moved. I was thinking about the title for a long time when I was putting it together, and I realized archival practice actually involves the arts, involves community, involves oral in many ways. So you don't have to separately have to look at these. They all form part of practice. So, and it's of course research based. So let's start. Hello.
Will you speak now?
Can I? Does it help? Hello, can you hear? Yes.
Yeah, it's working.
It's falling down.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. Got it. Can you hear? Yes. Okay. So let's start with, this is like the field of archives today. I mean, we're looking at archives all the time, every day, every moment. So what in the world are we trying to do? I mean, we need to start from here, that archives are ubiquitous. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you will be subsumed by them. And they have a way of dragging you in. I mean, all of us know of the power of black and white photographs, especially if you've never seen them, and how you kind of go into it. The world is a whole series of black and white photographs depending on what you're looking at. So how does archival practice highlight, what years ago there's a let me just read this quote before I take this further. As boundaries, this is from Sue Brekel in Archival Practices and the Practice of Archives in the Visual Arts. As boundaries blur between disciplines and professions, as curating and archiving become part of the daily activities of documented and presented selfhood, archives are no longer the domain primarily of the art archivist or the art historian. The status and remit of the archival practitioner is more ambiguous than ever. And that's the thing that one needs to highlight, that if you're working with archives today, you're not only working with competitors like this, you need to be very clear what is your archive and what is the story you're trying to tell. Archives of all kinds are what they do. When you see an archive, you get information which was presented like is happening on the screens here. At one point of time, they have been created. And the point in time that this person is looking at it from a very different culture, very different time, you are somehow making a connection and making sense in your way. So when, as people who have created archives, we want people to make sense of it, then what is it that we are trying to make sense of? The object of the archive itself has to be clear, which may or may not tally with the object by which the content was collected in the first place. So, and another the thing that I've written down there below is the use of the word entertainment. Very often, the archive itself is a source of entertainment. Do you want to reduce it to that, the work that we are trying to do? I wouldn't think so. In which case, then how do we lift it out of the morass of archives that surround us and make it mean something else? In order to do this, I have kind of gone through a journey which is partly personal, but also partly I was invited either to look at or in some senses also joined. And then curiously, one of the projects that you see out here are also something that the IFA funded as part of the arts research project, I think in 2005 or 4, I'm forgetting when. And what I remember most about that project is when I handed the project report in, it was partly in Hindi and partly in English. Partly because it became such a voluminous document, I couldn't see myself translating the whole thing. So I made it very clear that oral histories, people's memories, reminiscences, which were done in the language of Hindi, remained in Hindi. But the summary of that got used into making the project, that was converted into English. Just in the way the mind works. When we listen across languages and make sense in a language, we process it in. So this project began initially as part of an IFA grant. At that time, I'm forgetting what it was called, but it was about looking at resistance songs in central India from the mid-80s to 2005 or something like that, about 30 years of a generation of resistance music and song. It involved people going out and talking to people. It so happened that many of the people one met were people whose children I had taught in a primary school in the same area. So there was a prior connect, which brings me to a very important aspect of actually collections and the way the content comes in. What is the connect that we have with the source of this object or information? I mean, the deeper and more kind of multi-layered that connection is, the content that you get also becomes open to a multiple set of uses. It's not one-dimensional. And when this part of it, which was the collection, the oral history archive was being created at this point, these photographs from there, you see young people from the same locality actually recording others, an earlier generation from the same region. One of the advantages of doing that, and it's something I've actually felt and used always in my projects is to get two generations to enter into conversation even in the collection process. Because it is people you're speaking in the same language and are somewhat known to you, the way you approach the question, you give them leeway, and more than that, you give a lot of detail. Detail, if an outsider were to come and ask, you may or may not get. So that I find is a very, that's something that I've tried to follow in all the projects that one has been doing. In fact, one incident that comes to my mind in this project was one evening, because the thing was when people went out with the video cameras, they came back to the room that we had, which was the project office, and handed over the cameras. And the idea was to kind of transfer the tapes into computer, digitize it, and so on and so forth. And one youngster was really excited when he walked into the room and said, "I didn't know this at all." I said, "What didn't you know?" He said, "This is my aunt. I've known her since I was born. But I didn't know that the same tool in the field had 3 different names depending on the use you put it to." And I said, "Wow, it's news for you, it's news even for me." So then you discover a little bit more of questioning. You discover that depending on the season and the work a particular tool is doing, the term it gets derived from the work it does changes. It's like traditional technology was adaptive, and this even reflects in the language around it. And here you find an object telling me this rather than a linguist. Moving on, when you collect information of this kind, which is from one place or community, one of the first, there was talk about the ethics of archives earlier on in Urvashi's talk. And as someone who had often heard about people having research on ennui, PhD fever, we will answer the way we know what these PhD walas want and we'll answer it like that. So I said, one way to kind of overcome that is to tell the people that the information you're sharing with us will be shown back to you on such and such a date in such and such place. So at the time of questions, you make clear what this is going to be used for. And it begins from within your locality. So here is a scene from Imphal Valley. This was year 2005. A brief geography on the valley. Imphal Valley has 4 rivers coming into it and 1 river moving out. So in heavy rainfall years, it gets really flooded. But heavy rainfall years are not rare. They must have been happening over centuries. So when some friends of mine from there had called saying, "You've been working in theater when you do these shows," the situation is that because there's so much flooding, people are kind of trying to block the flow of water, but it's water. So you stop the flow in one direction, it goes into another. So neighboring colonies are accusing each other of sending water into them, and they're throwing stones, and it's a matter of time before things get worse. So can we have some way by which conversation can be created between people, between colonies? So I said, I'm sure it can be done. It's a question of, so I landed up there and we kind of talked. And I said, I was told about how this is not the first time it's happening. So my immediate thought was, if it's not the first time it's happening, then there has to be some local record which goes way back in time. Now the question is to find it. Okay, we had a month of research before the date was given for the show. So I said one way to do it, especially in small towns, look at libraries that people have, personal libraries. And Imphal is not just a small town, it was also a royal kingdom capital city. So then somebody got in touch with R.K. Binodini Devi, who was the queen at that time, and she heard of what we were trying, and she said, actually, I have not gone through all my library, but you're welcome to come and have a look and see if you find anything. While we were looking at other material, classical government records and stuff, we said, but that doesn't divide this information by locality, by neighborhood. And then we run into this book called the Tutenlong in Meitei, Methelon, written 400 years ago, handwritten in the old Bengali script, right? But in Methelon, which describes water flows in the valley of that time with the names of the localities and villages the same as they are today. So here you have in 2005 having flooding, and you're now suddenly found records which tells you where never to build a house, where it's normally good, but if it's a bad rain, then it's going to get flooded, which is perfectly safe to build a house, only good for paddy cultivation and nothing else. They've divided that land already based on experience, but we have not even listened to that experience of the past. So then in the shows, what we used to do was, so this is like the shows had to move around, had to be in a free space, so anybody could walk in. So what we did was we converted a market. When the sun went down, the market emptied. So the entire marketplace, we put a screen up, and there were some musicians, uh, the people who would read out from the text referring to that particular locality, while the videos out here played life in that locality today. So your audio is 400 years, your video is current. That immediately got people's attention. And then the next part of it was turning the camera onto the audience moment anybody came up with a question. So then we got people share the screen space. So whether whatever your status in society, you get the same screen space if you want to make a comment on what you've just seen. Immediately the kind of level of discussion changed. Of course, for people, friends of mine who are actually building this archives of of the localities as they're going along, they said we have never had comments like this coming in all our years of talking to people. See, because when you provoke people into a discussion, everyone's going to dredge their experience and memory to come up with something to say in order to either rebut or add to. And that requires just कहते हैं, मतलब you need an ambience. माहौल चाहिए. And this kind of open eye exhibition thing created the perfect mahal, perfect ambience to have that kind of question answer, which I think is one of the very essential parts of what I just said. The status and remit of the archival practitioner is more ambiguous than ever. We must remember that. And remember that we have to push the boundaries of where an archive can take us. We are creating the archives here, we want to, but it's up to us now to push it, to get more information, get that to evoke more. In another one of, this is from Central India. In Central India over the years, because one knows this place, one has done kind of collected various kinds of histories. So this was a time when we were collecting farming histories from across 2 districts. So we created a lot of folk tales came out, a lot of stories which may be folk tales, may not be, one doesn't know. But also there were some which were constant across the entire width of the 2 districts. Same kind of stories cropped up. And so this was, it's there on YouTube now. It's called Pehelwan Kaun, who is the strongest, who's the strongest. But essentially, it's a local potter's work who loves making all these funky looking animals. We converted that into stop motion animation using video cameras and told the folk tales in this form. All of this done by people who are untrained in any of the visual arts. It's essentially like a 2-week workshop with 3 people, me and 2 others. We just did, one of them was a sound engineer, one of them was me, and the third person was a cinematographer. So between the 3 of us, we did these and these are workshops in which it's not like a 2-day workshop that you do and then let people out. Every day was a workshop. You talk for an hour in the morning, get out and do this today, come back. So one day we taught lighting for an hour in the morning, because some of these things you have to light up. So to make a stop motion. So they learn that in the morning for hours, spend the rest of the day taking, lighting up whatever the part of the story they want to tell. Evening, we see it. So it's like, feedback, immediate feedback, the classical good project, you get immediate feedback. So all of that happened. But as a result, it ended up in quite 2 or 3 of these stop motion animations besides other things. But more to the point, after this potter's work was shown, we had singers, local singers, including the first time around, we wanted a woman and a man's voice to be kind of doing some periodically singing these local songs at the time of this festival that was happening. But it was really difficult to get a female voice. Central India 2005, it wasn't very easy. By the time the first show happened, the next year around, we had like about 70 applications to be the female voice, including one of them later on into there was this television program on Indian Idol type something about music, landed up there also. So, this kind of getting people to share whatever their skill is and knowledge is like a very important part of sharing the archive. It's a bit that we as archival practitioners often miss out on, and which I've always felt that it leads to a lot more. Moving so 10 years later at Ambedkar University, Delhi, we've started the Delhi Oral History Project at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And because the university is situated at Kashmiri Gate, one of the, this was I think the second local exhibition we did in Delhi. The first one was in West Delhi in this place called Shadi Khanpur, which is an urban village. It started out as a village which lost its lands in 1930 because the Indian Agriculture Research Institute, agriculture research in Delhi needs farmland. So they took over the farmlands of two villages to build this institute, and suddenly making these two villages of farmers without any land to farm in, and becoming like original Dilliwalas, having to fend for themselves some other way. But anyway, to come back to Kashmiri Gate, we collected photographs from families around classical storytelling, family member posing with photographs of the Havelis in 60s. But more interestingly, Kashmiri Gate is part of Shahjahanabad, Old Delhi. And I was always, after a conversation with some colleagues at the university, struck by the fact that actually very few of people in Delhi knows what kind of music would have been heard in Delhi in, say, the 1920s. So then we asked Irfan Zuberi, who's like the music wizard at the IGNCA archives, Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts Archives, to give us a kind of lectern on music in the early 20th and late 19th century Delhi. So he brought with him old recordings, 1920 recordings made in Delhi. I mean, I'm not much of a music aficionado of any kind, but what struck me was that, and what everyone talked about was how things like Dhrupad and Khayal, in the course of when the recording industry came in, even in a place like Delhi, you could see over the decades how it was changing, and you could hear it in the music itself. And here, this is the Dara Shikoh building, which is now used as the Partition Museum in Delhi. But at that time, it was like a building under renovation. So Ankit Chadda, who's no more with us, a Dastan Go from Delhi, he and Supriya Gandhi together created this Dara Shikoh Dastan, which has later on gone on in other places, but it was first time played out on the steps of the Dara Shikoh building. And we'd kind of lit up the building in various ways, made it like a thing for people who went past on the road to see, oh my God, what is happening here? But to make a university change color at night is pushing the boundaries. Anyway, so now the content for this came from the Delhi Oral Archives project. As of today, I mean, the last I know, almost about 650 odd interviews from old-time residents in Delhi have been gathered. And apparently it's an ongoing project, but the Delhi government has continues to give money for this project to the university, but I have no clue what's happening to it now. So along part of the way we kind of, Ambedkar University Delhi is the city university. It's run by the city government. So one of the first decisions one took at the Center for Community Knowledge was, let us find out who lives in Delhi. So in order to do that, you can't, it's a city of 15 plus million people, man. So it's too big to do as one project. So we broke it down to micro stories, collections, neighborhood by neighborhood. And every year we did one neighborhood project somewhere, which was again, you go choose a neighborhood, find a place where you show it. People you go to, find some local group or residents who are there with you in different neighborhood. Like in Nizamuddin, she was a resident, Vani Subramani, this was, and a former resident. There was a local architect who lived there who gave us a map of the colony. Then Shadi Khampur was a local theatre group, Jannate Manch, who had just bought this studio space, and they wanted to kind of tell people that we are people who live here. So I said, great, nothing better than a neighborhood museum to actually get people to walk into your space. So Mehrauli, there's a collective at Mehrauli which kind of is looking at making Mehrauli more transport friendly, because walking in Mehrauli is an invitation to breaking a bone. So they were part of the team that, so there's always a local team that collaborated with the university and their researchers to collect the data for this. In the process, building up a story of Delhi as it expanded over the years, and making some really interesting ways to present the story. For example, while the exhibit part of it would be familiar to anyone who's walked into an exhibition, this map, I'm not sure. Can people see the map on this side? This had 4 stamps on it. One says, I love, I hate, I fear, and I never been there. And basically what you had to do was come up to the map and just stamp the part that connected to these 4 emotions. There was so much of a demand for it that actually every day we had to change the map because there were too many stamps, and next day people wouldn't be. But also it pointed out black holes inside what is otherwise a space less than 1 kilometer square. You know, the whole when you're talking about safety in the city and stuff like that, it's a function of many things. And one tends to forget that sometimes when both men and women have to do this stamping, you realize that some reasons are common to both genders and some aren't. So it kind of nuances even your understanding of how the city is. Similarly, in this one of the really unusual engagements we had done in the locality at Shadi Khampur was get the children who lived all around the really narrow lane houses there to talk about your favorite destination inside Shadi Khampur. Nothing else, just your favorite destination. Very often it was a school. In the initial days, first time when they started it, it used to be done outside in the park, outside this building where the museum was. It was like winter sun and all of that, very nice. Initially, all we got was India flag and school buildings. But by day 3 and 4, it started coming to friends' houses or it came to particular shops. And then there were some really interesting bits of information that popped up. It's like there was one in which there are a group of people around what you can see is like garbage dump. And then everybody else is some distance away. And I still remember asking that kid, what were you trying to tell us? सिर्फ मेरे को वहाँ जाना पड़ता है just to see what my brother is doing because वहाँ पे सुना है कि वो मतलब drugs and stuff happen there. So I just kind of go and keep an eye out. Eye out means parents must have told him कि जरा देखना क्या कर रहा है. But this kind of story, if you ask someone, nobody's going to tell you. But you have to push the ways in which you get information also. And like in MP, one used young people to ask the old. The same principle we followed also here. We asked the adults as part of the oral histories thing, but we also asked young people to what do you see about the place? And suddenly you come up with these real gems of information. At the Nizamuddin Neighborhood Museum, a very interesting, this was early days of social media when YouTube was seen as a social media channel, right? It's still there on YouTube, Yadon Ki Geography. If you go there, it's like Nizamuddin, the map of Nizamuddin, and various points pop up, and multiple views of, here we are looking at the railway station, and here you have a taxi driver at the railway station who's first an auto and then a taxi at the station. You have a coolie at the station. You have a resident from 2 streets away from the railway station talking about what the railway station and the rail lines meant to them. And here you have a person who later became the station master, whose father was the station master, and then so 4 completely different perspectives on how a railway station is seen. This ability to bring multiple perspectives, which oral history provides, also when you present like this, suddenly make people realize that their own space has got different points of view. Like we all, in families, we tell our parents, like, "Aapko kya samajh mein aayega?" And parents tell the kids, "You will never." What it is, it's like multiple ways of understanding what the family is. But the same thing happens all around. And it's important to kind of bear that in mind when you're talking about histories of place and of actually even ways of doing things. Because depending on the time period you're in and your generation, you will probably, without inadvertently, without even knowing what you're doing, follow the lead set by your peers rather than what your elders have told you. But you're going to be doing the same thing that your elders did, but in a different way. So how describing the archives in ways that go beyond the web online archive. This is the online, it's actually delhimemories.in is the site. It's a photo archive of all the photographs of Delhi that we collected from people's houses over 10 years. It's an amazing archive. If you ever look at it, you'll find people's views of Delhi, which are and Delhi is a city which is mostly run by institutional cameras. Here, these are family cameras, people's personal photographs, 1880 to 1980. It's a really stunning collection, which we've brought through individually meeting people or through the neighborhood museums, which giving us leads about who's got photo collections and so on and so forth. Local history exhibitions is another one of them, which lead to actually picture books. For one common thing we've tried to do across various of these museums is actually create picture storybooks for kids as supplementary reading material. But actually it's very easy to give to many of schools in Delhi are not just government, they're also private schools run by NGOs. So we like there are some NGOs who want to print books for children, so we give them the content and then it reaches out into many of these school libraries. And we've done it for about 3 of the neighborhood museums. They don't happen at the time of the collection of the archive or its first public display, but over time it gets used in that fashion. For example, this book was published by Vani Prakashan they actually said, in the 1930s, there were writings about places based on oral histories from people written there. But it's gone out of fashion in Hindi publication, and they were very glad that another town has come up in. So this is a story of the making of Aisi Basi Piparia, the making of Piparia, a 150-year-old town, from the voices of the people who live there. And it's in Hindi. I mean, we were hoping at some point to do an English translation, but it never happened. So that's still an open exercise. So publications is like, as a kind of archival output, it's one which is the densest. But because of its density, because the density of information in it, that and the online archive, you have to think many times before you get into it, because you need to know what exactly you're doing and what is the level of depth that you're going to allow people to enter and so on and so forth. But we can discuss specific cases if maybe later on in the Q&A, but I'll move on to another really interesting exercise that was done, which actually I found has been copied quite often. This started as, no, she's not here. So this started out as a design student at Ambedkar University, Delhi, Gurpreet. Her neighbors were Afghans. So she wanted to do a project. She became friends with them and wanted to do a project on how Afghans think of themselves in Delhi, right? So she collected a whole lot of objects and made this week-long exhibition. But after that, came up to us and said, can we do something which is more long-lasting? And I said, well, why don't we create a primer? Because if what I've understood from this exhibition is, you know, ways, tangible ways by which people from Afghanistan see the city of Delhi. Can we think of a primer which gives us 25 words which describes their life in the city? So these are the 25 words that came up. 2 of them are here. Kabristan is one word. Kabristan we are familiar with. Dastarkhan is the cloth on which you serve food because everyone sits on the floor. And the comment being made by these characters is that we've had to get sofas to a house because our friends in Delhi can't sit on the floor and eat. So it's each of them is a comment also on Delhi, despite it being a comment also on themselves. And this thing we brought out as part of Ambedkar University's publication. And then when Simurg Center that works with the Afghans in Delhi saw this, they immediately got very excited. And then we had some conversation and they've kind of taken it much further than we could even imagine. But outside the city of Delhi, I suddenly came across a friend from Brazil who at one point of time had got a copy of this book from me, sent a copy of 25 words from the Amazonas, the women of the river, 25 words that they describe the river. It's not just a river for them, it's many things. And these are 25 of the most important ways. And there are 6 such books I've discovered from various places, which I think this children's primer may have been meant for something else at one point of time. But I think for adults, it's a great way of drawing attention to a limited number of very important ideas. Then this started out as a very different kind of archive, the Sajjad Zahir Literary and Cultural History Archive, which a friend of mine belonged to this family, and she had asked if I could help in digitizing it. So Ambedkar University those days couldn't digitize, but then we got in touch with RMRL Chennai to do the digitizing. Then University of Texas Austin said that we'll pay for the whole thing and host it on our archives. You're welcome to make a mirror if you want, and so on and so forth. But then that's not the part of the story I'm talking about. There were 160 photographs in this archive, of which barely 5 photographs could be the people in them could be identified. And the question was, how do you identify photographs from the past? It's not that people wouldn't know, but how do you locate that person who has that information? So those days I'd come across this platform called Zoo Inverse. Zoo Inverse is a really interesting platform. It started out as a crowdsourced astronomical database builder, in which what you had to do was use the process, because they will share photographs with you, but you have to process the photographs in order to make sense. And if you like looking at the night sky and comparing it with photographs, you can see things that should be there or shouldn't be there, and which is how the work began. Since then, it's gone to many things. The Tate uses it to kind of now annotate its collection. It's moved way outside the scientific community into the social sciences and humanities. But this, at that time, was still pretty new for the non-scientific community. So suggested that UTexas get in touch with them. And then they got the Zoo Inverse platform to actually host the photograph part of this archive, which anybody can comment on, and there is a webmaster who can decide. And if it is accepted, then you are informed. Otherwise, you said, sorry, wrong number, or whatever webmasters say. The reason I brought this up is very often when we are talking about archives, we talk about annotating information, and it's a bit of thinking outside the box can help you annotate anything. And everything, I mean, like we saw in the first photograph, the resources are there today. It's a question of knowing what to cross connect. Essentially, that I think is a very crucial part of this exercise. Currently, at the Kerala Museum, which brief background, the Kerala Museum was set up in 1985. So it's like a 40-year-old museum, almost approaching 40, 38, something like that. And it's got the history telling in it. It started out as a history museum, and it's the history telling in it is like still 1980s, right? So it's not very exciting. More than that, it doesn't have diverse opinions. And as the people who run the museum, that's one of the things they were very clear about. We want to bring in diversity of views, but what can you do in the museum to bring it in? Archival content can be created, already exists in many places. How do you introduce it in? So one of the first things we did was move into this whole journal platform, which is essentially the digital archive of the museum. When you go to the keralamuseum.org website, you'll see this thing called journal. Click on it and you come up to this first flow, which is like a whole set of digital exhibitions. Meghna here was in the early days of making these exhibitions. The exhibitions all have one very common thing to them. Each exhibition is connected to one or two voices. The annotation is through people talking about an experience. There will also be a bibliography at the end. But without this, we don't take it in, because if you want an archive that's living, you want to have people's names connected to it. People who are recognized, like the Pulavar community is one of the most experimental of the Tolpaku Tholpavakut performing community, and they've made a name for themselves in this. So we tried to talk to two sets of performers, one a very innovative one and one another. They knew we were talking to both, but we ensured that both the points of view came into the story of this art form. We're not really taking sides. What the archive is meant to do is show the diversity of expressions within this form today. More than that, you have a bibliography and you have names. Now one can the person who's online can follow up on. Another important part of it is actually now it's come to every 2 weeks we have a talk at the museum, either a academic like here Dr. Jenny Peters, or it can be a practitioner, or it can be activists like Nalini Nayak and Mercy Alexander. So it's a really wide range. But talking about things that are very much part of, media. If you're using media as a way of finding out what people are interested in, whether it's online or the print or whatever, these are all items of conversation that become part of these academic or grassroots level talks at the museum. We find it's a very important way of actually connecting the museum to a region, because immediately now the museum loses this thing of being in an ivory tower. In the year that all of this has started at the Kerala Museum, it's actually been, everyone talks about how you kind of recreated yourself. I was there in Indonesia, and people out there have followed the change in the Kerala Museum's approach. I was completely taken by surprise. I know people think about Kerala, but to discover one particular museum they're looking at was quite heartening. So as part of this, we are starting an oral history program again at the Kerala Museum now. focus being on coastal histories. And we are kicking off the program with a Oral History Association of India conference in January this year, 2025, and then in which lot of people that we will, lot of people from places we want to go to, or communities we want to meet, will be coming to the conference. We are having a workshop for people who are the equivalent of the kids going to interview their parents and elders. So we're doing a workshop at the museum for that before the project kind of gets off the ground. So it's a little, I mean, earlier in the day I was saying, somebody asked, so how many objects does the museum have? And I said, actually, besides the original collection of 250 Indian masters paintings, the museum has nothing. We get objects in and they go out. We don't try to keep anything in the museum. They're all on loan for exhibitions and they go out again. In fact, there's one semi-permanent exhibition on the founding of the museum that has two objects. One is the original table in which the founder sat on, table and chair, and one is like a table full of letters and original, documentation of that kind that was made when the museum was being set up. Besides that, we just have information which is recorded in some form or fashion. In those days, there was no digital recording, so it was in text form, in paper, but a lot of it now is audio and video. And now, before I wind up, a very different kind of oral history archiving and its use project. This is a story based on people who are from Myanmar but can't live there anymore. So many years of civil war has actually led to a situation where 80% of the student population of Myanmar is no longer in Myanmar, they're outside. Universities have formed, there is something called a virtual federal university to help students who are outside Myanmar to actually complete the course of study. There are courses being created to be done online and so on. So this whole exercise began when teachers from middle schools and primary schools approached the colleagues who were part of the VFU, Virtual Federal University, saying that we have all had to leave, but you're doing stuff for higher education. What are you doing for school kids? We need text material. We need material for stories. Kids still want to read something, but there's nothing to read. So how can we make something to read? So it was the project essentially ran through, it's still running, but it began in, I think, January of 23 through a series of online conversations from people from Myanmar, Thailand. I was there from India, somebody from the Netherlands, somebody from the US, but essentially it was people who were mostly from Myanmar dispersed around the world, wondering how they could bring the stories of displacement as the text for the classroom. When we were doing that, we realized also that the text for the classroom or a story like this is the story about this object. The last part of the story about a water bottle. Someone had to make a 40-kilometer trek through the jungle to move out from Myanmar to Thailand, and they kind of came across all kinds. If you can read this, you'll get a sense of what kind of travel they were doing. So it's like all the things that this water bottle saw. Similarly, this one is made from the little bit of a lungi of this lady's mother, the last time she had met her, that she's made into a kind of wristband. So she's using this, so they're telling the stories of this and what it means to them, and where they, it's all associated connections to this object. The chappals given by a friend who suddenly one day disappeared and was never seen again, and what that friend meant to her, and so on and so forth. So I'm saying you don't need to actually have interviews of people. Collecting to create a biography of an object is a fascinating way of bringing in oral histories, of bringing in experiences, and bringing in also hearsay that you have about the object, because you may not have bought it in the first place. This chappal was not bought by this person in the first place, but she knows where this person bought it from and what it meant for her to share it with her. So that other part of it, which is not her experience but is comes out of her connection with the source of this object, also comes into the story. So it's like a multi-layered storytelling that sometimes goes beyond what simple oral history can provide. And I find that to think of things as just museum pieces is really undervaluing what a thing is. I think that's all for now. Thank you.